Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Salvador Barragan from Data Meeting. I'm the Director of Data Governance for Data Meeting. Today, we're going to discuss active data governance and how it's used in Alation. So Alation is a tool that is used to catalog all your items throughout your organization, making sure that you're able to find your data, making sure that your data is of a certain level, high quality, empowering data stewards, etc. So a lot of times when we think of data governance, we think of a large program that has to be instituted in your organization. But what we're working with Alation on really is the ability now to apply data governance within the Alation product, within the Alation environment. And Alation has developed a framework that enables us to both use Alation and also to institute data governance. So that, in essence, is the topic of discussion today. But before I continue further, I'd just like to introduce the presenters. Oh, first the agenda. So we'll discuss a little bit about data meeting, who we are, discuss who Alation is, what Alation does, what data governance, active data governance is, and then how we apply data governance in Alation. So as part of that, we're going to discuss data strategy, how data strategy is used within Alation, data policies, data quality, data lineage, data stewardship, workflows within Alation. And at the last section, we're going to discuss a little bit about change management, really a very key area that is required in order to really ensure that your Alation implementation with data governance really is successful. And after that, we'll be demoing each of these sections after each one of those sections. So we'll have a demo as part of that. And then after that, we'll do a Q&A, take anybody's questions at that time. So the presenters today, as I said, my name is Salvador Barragan. I'm the Director of Data Governance here at Data Meeting. My associate is Sean Glenn. He will be leading the demos throughout our presentation. So let's start off with who Data Meeting is. So Data Meeting is a small boutique business intelligence consulting firm. It provides end-to-end BI solutions. It has consultants around the globe. We have consultants in Brazil, India, the United States. We have a large footprint both in the United States and the LATAM markets. Our services really revolve around business intelligence, data management, where it encompasses our data governance program, change management, delivery management, education, and training. Some of our partners are AWS, Tableau, Informatica, Microsoft Azure, Matillion, Cloudera, Alteryx, which we've been Partner of the Year for several years, as well as Alation, which is the topic of our conversation today. So let's start a little bit about what I would call wasted time. So anybody who's worked in any organization around data and has to use data understands the reality of wasted time. So this can happen in many different ways. A lack of inability to discover the right data that you want, discovering data that you really don't need, but it kind of resembles the data that you think you need, as well as probably data that's not very good, that hasn't been cleaned, is disorganized. And so statistics tell us that 37% of all analysts spend their time looking for the right data. Per week, that's about 26 hours they also spend on manual spreadsheet tasks if they don't have the right tools. And they also spend about 60% of their time just trying to clean and organize the data. Now, if you add all that up, that's quite a bit amount of time that's used for things that are not really take away from the efficiencies of the data analyst. So over 90% of a data analyst's time is spent on finding, cleaning, and organizing data, with less than 10% on actual analysis. So the ROI amount of time that you're going to spend on your actual duties that are going to return an ROI to your organization is 10%, and 90% is spent truly on areas that should be areas that an analyst should not spend their time on, or at least not as much as they're spending their time on. So let's move on and talk a little bit about Alation, what Alation is, and why we feel that Alation is one of the core products around the data governance market and really around solving data governance problems. So let's start a little bit from a high level. So Alation is a proven global organization. It has over 500 plus enterprise customers. 35% of these are in the Fortune 100. They have a very strong ecosystem. They have over 60 partners worldwide, numerous technology partners. Not only that, but they're an industry leader. They've been named a leader in data governance solutions by Forrester Wave in Q3 of 23. They're also the 3-time Snowflake Data Governance Partner of the Year, so they're very, very closely integrated with Snowflake as a data warehouse. The value-driven solutions that they bring to the table really revolve everything around that we're going to discuss today: active data governance, metadata management, compliance, self-service analytics, privacy, etc. So all these are key areas that drive the Alation value solution. Also, from a side note, in terms of growth, Alation has experienced huge growth. They're valued currently at about 1.7 billion. They've had numerous funding um, phases. They've had 340 million in VC funding recently raised. They've achieved over 100 million. They also have what they refer to as 800 plus Alationauts. So their growth is expanding at a rapid pace. But more than anything, they're a market leader in this area, an area that is very important to most organizations, if not all. So now we're going to get into the meat of our presentation. I'm going to discuss what active data governance is at a high level, and then I'm going to drop into what data strategy is, and then go into data policies. And after that section, we'll take a short break before we start the demo on data policies. So what is Alation's active data governance? So Alation's active data governance really is a framework that addresses, I would say, most of what data governance needs to be addressed, but leveraging Alation. So these, you can see these as steps, obviously, but at the same time, some of these steps are going to be intertwined. So even though it follows a circular pattern, some of these steps can be done in unison. So it's not something that has to be seen as step one, step two, step three, but we do have a first step though, and that would be the establish the governance framework. So this is probably one of the key areas, and an area that probably sits outside of, I would say, Alation, because this is where you're going to discuss your vision and your mission. It's going to be where you develop your data strategy, how your people are going to be organized from an operating model for your data governance. But it's probably one of the key steps, if not the key step, right? Because it's going to really establish how your catalog is going to be organized, how it's going to be empower its users. Without that first step, the next steps become very difficult. But after establishing your governance framework, you move on to populating the data catalog. Once you've decided and when you've looked at what the strategy is going to be, understand what that operating model is going to be, understand the data domains you're going to be using, then you go into how you're going to populate that data catalog. In other words, how you're going to ingest the metadata, analyze it, determining the categories of that data, the domains, what are the characteristics of the data, and the privacy details. The second step is empowering the data stewards. So this step is really where, the people that are going to really work within a tool on a day-to-day basis. They're going to be the individuals that are really going to identify the data, curate the data. They're going to develop the workflows. They're going to be given the power in order to do a lot of the areas around Alation, address the needs of users, of both individual users as well as groups, etc. So this step is very key as you move forward. So based upon the data stewards, one of their key roles is going to be curating assets. So that next step, once you understand who the data stewards are, is giving them the ability to curate those assets. So at this step, they're going to establish data policies, standards, terms. They're going to curate the actual objects that they're bringing in. They're going to describe that data. They're going to apply trust flags. They're going to document any data quality rules that may apply to each of the individual data sets, the tables, the schemas, the objects, etc. Once the curation process starts and that step has begun, you move on to apply the policies and controls. So implementing the policies and controls, generating the different lineage charts, building any rules or reports that may be needed for the data at the quality level, enabling the workflows for those objects, the glossary terms, policies around that. Once those key steps are done, then you can really start looking at collaboration within the community of your organization, within the people that are going to be the first users of Alation. So at this point, you definitely want to leverage the knowledge around your organization. You want to address any questions that people may have. You want to start those conversations, really start pushing Alation throughout your organization, really champion it. And you also want to determine whether the data that you're bringing in is fit for purpose, the intended use for both the users that are going to be obviously using it, but as well as any use cases that may arise in that process. The last step is the important one because at this step you're going to measure how successful Alation is. So you're going to determine, what the current uh, how much curation has occurred within your data sets. You're going to measure the usage of your data. How often are people going in and using it? How many assets are being created? A good place would be like looking at your business glossary. How many new terms are being added to your business glossary? And then running audit reports around this. So this will be a key area to really, this will enable you to understand, okay, where are we successful or we're not, and really address those areas that you're not successful. So active data governance, even though it's a framework that was established by Alation itself, is really tied to other frameworks. So it has aspects of DAMA. So if you're familiar with DAMA, and DCAM, these are two high-level frameworks, very popular frameworks. But active data governance takes from both those frameworks, as it does from the DGI framework and some new frameworks from individuals that have come out recently, such as a data governance framework from Kim Weinzer. So all these areas, these frameworks, active data governance touches upon all of them. Now, obviously, a caveat here is that active data governance doesn't go into the depth that, say, as a DCAM does. So DCAM is definitely, for example, or DAMA, are definitely very in-depth frameworks that go very deep into a lot of different areas around data governance. They might even go into cybersecurity. They'll go into data architecture. They go into a lot of areas that active data governance doesn't so much touch upon, but it does take away from some of these key frameworks in order to really address the data governance they want to apply within Alation. But definitely, if you wanted to look at these other frameworks as well and bring them in, already you'll be using aspects of it. You'll notice you will be as you really start applying active data governance within Alation. The next section that we're going to discuss is data strategy and vision. So this is that first step that we just saw within the active data governance framework. And this step, as I mentioned before, is really key, right? Because it's going to really, without a strategy, without an ability to describe your program, establish the mission, define the goals of the program, it doesn't matter what tool you get. It doesn't matter, if you have no tool. If you don't do this first step, you'll be very, very difficult for you to promote your program, really get it off the ground, and really have champions that are going to support the program throughout its life cycle. So going back to the active data governance framework, we're going to really address in this area that first step here, the establish the governance framework, set the vision and the mission, and organize what data governance is going to look like. So the first step is the vision, mission, and strategy of data governance. Now, here we're going to define a little bit. We're not going to develop obviously a strategy or an actual mission and vision, but we're going to give you kind of the steps you want to follow to establish those. So the first thing you really want to do is have a vision. What is the vision of what you intend to do? And the vision can be really addressed by understanding the direction. So the direction of where you want to take your data governance program. So it could be as simple as we intend to define all our terms for X, Y, and Z organization or for X, Y, and Z departments as an example of a vision. We want to ensure that that data is available to all our data scientists. So that can be, you can establish that as your vision. After that, you want to look at what the mission is, and this establishes the outcomes to reach the vision. So what are the steps you need to take in order to reach that vision? So if you're saying, okay, our vision is to make sure that we define, catalog all the data from our organization, what will be the steps that you take in order to reach that vision? That, in essence, is what your mission is. And the strategy defines the path for the journey. In other words, it's almost like the playbook at that point. The strategy will tell you who's doing what, here's a framework, etc. That really will enable you to address both the vision and the mission and be able to accomplish those goals. Let's dive a little bit more into the vision of a data governance program. So when you're establishing a data governance program, you want to establish a framework, as I mentioned earlier, around vision, mission, and the aspects of what people are doing. So the vision should be something that you're looking at, trying to get to in the next 2 years. Sometimes it can be a bit longer. you can push it out about 3 years, but you really don't want to go beyond that for the simple reason that uh, uh, when you go beyond 2 or 3 years, you're starting to lack of enthusiasm may seep in, complacency. So you really want to keep that enthusiasm going. So you really want to ensure that whatever you're aspiring to do, it can be accomplished within those 2 or 3 years. Um, Next step is intend to drive your alignment really across the organization. So you want to align with your whole organization, with the stakeholders and your ecosystems. You don't want to be sitting outside of having, regardless if the ideas could be great, not really aligned with what your organization wants to accomplish. So, it goes back to understanding what your organization is and what their real needs are right now. So, what are those critical needs? Sometimes we call them critical use cases or critical business cases, and so you really want to understand those. So, after that, you really want to paint a picture of the future in a very positive way. Obviously, you don't want to be negative. So you want to understand what the current state is. So you want to kind of show, okay, here's where we're at today, and here's where we want to be in the future. When you paint it in that way, people can see a trajectory, a trend towards something that's going to be address the needs of the organization going forward. So some considerations to think about when you're looking at data governance, and some of these you might be familiar with. One of the first ones, and it's not intended to be the first one, but it's something that obviously we live in a very regulatory, world. There's regulations all the time. I don't have to tell anybody, you've got everything from, Sarbanes-Oxley, GLBA, you got PI requirements, you have GDPR, CCPA, and you have other nations also really, really getting into the regulatory environment around data. That's become a very hot topic, and I think it will continue to be. And you're seeing these really around recent cybersecurity problems that we're having. Recent organizations have been hacked. So the regulatory environment we see is just going to increase. So that regulatory environment, as it increases and more regulations come down the pipeline, is really going to represent opportunities for data governance folks. These opportunities obviously are gonna require new implementation of tools, of policies, processes in order to address these new regulations based upon what's happening in the world. So there's opportunities that are coming, and because of these regulations, so these opportunities will enable data governance departments really to add both the skills and the technology they need going forward. The other thing you want to consider, obviously, when you're looking at data governance, is data itself. So when you're thinking of data, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the volume of data. Data is growing at a rapid pace. It's doubling constantly. It's I think I don't know. Last projections are way beyond the trillions in terms of data being produced annually, and so this is also not only increasing the requirements around data governance. Um, but it also requires us to understand the range of the data, the depth, the quality of the data. These are all aspects that we need to understand about data as it grows. So it's not just volume, but the volume is increasing our need to really address other areas of the data where before, if we didn't have that much data, obviously it was manageable, but now things are requiring us to really take a broad look at data. And the last one is consider the politicalization of data. And I think this ties back to the regulatory environment. Um, the politics around data, and I think you're seeing the politics really around recently, I think around cybersecurity with the recent there's always obviously hacking going on, but the recent one in Las Vegas around the MGM is a classic example of data being hacked, systems going down, causing a lot of problems for business, for industries, different industries. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And I think that's going to those examples that are happening are really going to drive the political discussion around data. And I think as privacy issues become more apparent, people wanting to control their data more and more, that's going to play also another big role in what we can and cannot do with data within any organization. So here's some questions to ask when you're thinking about data today within your own organization. And remember, always think about what we can accomplish in 2 years, 2 to 3 years, when you ask these questions, because you don't want to ask, hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z. That's so far out that it's not realistic. So when you're thinking about the data today, you're thinking about what works, what is working today. So there's probably some good use cases that show the successes that you're having with your data. At the same time, there's also areas that you need to address. So what needs to be done differently? So you're going to find things in your organization that, maybe the transformation process is taking too long. Maybe the loading of data from one application to another not only takes long, but is has some problems in terms of not loading complete data. So those are just a couple of examples of what can be done differently. And then another key question is, what do you need to support today, the business today, when it comes to data? So from their standpoint, maybe there's a reporting issue, or maybe there's um, a data requirement or a data need in terms of new models that need to be built really to show a better return on investment. Or you can have other issues around, obviously AI has become now a hot topic. And so those areas might be areas that are needed to be supported. Um, and another key question is, what are the capabilities that need to be fixed, optimized, or innovated? And I think I touched a little bit upon that before, but you may have problems in your data pipelines. They may be dropping data, or the quality of the data might be not sufficient, or people may not know what data exists, or may not understand the lineage of the data or the context of the data. So those are some of the areas. And then obviously the innovative aspect is, it's hard to get innovative when you don't have the right data at the right time. So innovation is wonderful, but without the right data at the right time and the right quality, it becomes very difficult. And then, well, final question you may ask is, what else do we need to think about regarding our data? So there are going to be things that sit outside, of what's been thought before around your data, that may address both innovation, or may address, something that's missing. So the pitch and the vision. So when you're developing a pitch, it's almost like it is your vision statement in essence, but it really enables you to sell your program, both internally, and as well as with people that may sit outside of your organization. So a common definition, sometimes we talk about data, is data governance is the people, the process, and technology. You've heard that before, that enable delivery of the right data to the right people at the right time to allow data-driven decisions based upon trusted information. So that is a common definition you'll hear about, and hear about data governance, how it's defined. But every pitch can be slightly different, or completely different for that matter. It really depends on your organization and what the goals of your organization are. So, but that's an example of what a pitch would look like. It's a classical definition of data governance. The second area is the vision. So, with data governance, you want to establish and share the capabilities, process, and technologies to address. So, here are some aspects of what you may want to look at: data lifecycle, the retention of data, data quality, making sure you're aligned with data security, uh, trusted definitions. How good is the data? Can you trust it? And is the data being appropriately used? Now, the vision these are examples of a vision, but within your organization, that vision can add other areas that are not listed, such as, for example, data ethics or data lineage, um, etc. So it's this is just an example, but I think some of these examples can be repurposed for your organization. So the mission of data governance, this is where from the vision you go to the mission, and this is where we want to start establishing the program, establishing the framework. What is that going to look like? So the mission are the key areas of focus to achieve the vision. The mission is meant to be aligned. So you want to be aligned with the business. You want to define the steps that you're going to take in order to achieve the mission. Um, you want to make sure that that mission is used by your team on a continuous basis. It's not something that just sits, on a piece of paper, but obviously this can be electronic. But it's something that can be shared with other team members, stakeholders, as well as um, other people in your organization that may not be aware of it. So it's something that's very critical to definitely the success of your program as you move forward. So some questions to ask when you're developing your mission is it helping to realize the vision? So that's basic, because you want the mission to align with the vision. You don't want there to be any kind of division between them, any misalignment, because if you get that, it's your program's going to suffer. You also want to understand, can you accomplish what's being stated? If you can't, then obviously that's not a good mission statement. You want to build details that meet that data governance vision. So there's another aspect of aligning with that vision, making sure that they're both aligned, so that one builds upon the other. Next one, is it a real, is it tangible, or is it something that really cannot be met? So it has to be realistic. Um, and will it create the greatest return for your data? Does it have that highest regard for your data? Um, and that's I would say something that, you really want to think about that, because sometimes we lose traction, we lose kind of like, um, specificity when we start developing mission statements, that we forget that, okay, does this really address what we need for data? So some of the things you may want to include with your mission statement, um, some outcomes, so you prove that it's working, the data governance program. Some criteria. You want to build some of those details, as mentioned before, into your vision. Um, you wanna be big, definitely. You want to be bold. You definitely want to always aim for being the best. I wouldn't say best, but uh, I would say probably always continuously improving is something I like to use. And then you also want to make sure that your mission statement is marketable. Is it engaging? Is it exciting? It's not something that's dull, because it definitely is part of your whole package when you're selling to other people within your organization. So here's an example of data governance mission. So you want to make sure that your data governance mission establishes data owners for classes and specific data objects. You want to define centrally how your data is being handled. You want to introduce data quality monitoring and maintenance. You want to provide the right tools and access, to the people within your organization. You want to establish and promote the ethical use of data. You definitely don't want people that should not have access to data getting access to it, especially in the regulatory environments we currently live in. You want to train and expand knowledge in data matters across the organization, as part of your mission. Because what's the purpose of data if it doesn't expand the knowledge of your organization and give you a higher return on investment? So that of all those points, I truly feel that's probably one of the most important, because it goes back to, why are we here? We're here because the organization creates data and needs data in order to make better decision making, and depending on your industry, in order to obviously increase revenue, if you're in the private sector. So it's really a strong point that can emphasize more. So next section is, we're going to discuss a little bit about SMART goals for data governance. So SMART goals are targets that establish and push your program to new levels, to ensure that you can really um, review it and see, okay, and verify that you're being successful. It's So your SMART goals tend to change over time. They can get reprioritized at times, so they're flexible, but they're really good actionable targets that really allow you to measure how successful you're going to be, or you are being, with your program. So a little bit about SMART goals. So what does SMART stand for? So it's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So specific is what needs to be done. It's the word says it itself. You want to be exact on what needs to be done. You want to be able to measure what is occurring. You also want to be realistic. In other words, you want to be, is it achievable? Can you achieve what is being asked for in the time that's being allowed? Because if you can't, then already you're starting out with something that's unrealistic. And obviously, this ties back to the point we're constantly making. Is it relevant? Does it go back to the mission and the vision, why we're even here? And is it within a certain specified time? So do we have, like we talked about, the 2 and 3 years before? And so we really definitely want the goal to be time bound within something that's realistic as well. So here we ask around the SMART goals: the who, the what, the when, the why, and the how. So who will take ownership of the action or task within of that SMART goal? What is the need to support the vision? When will these items be addressed? Why are these items important to vision? And how do we determine success of the SMART goal? So these are really the key, the classical whys of how we're going to accomplish those SMART goals. And here's an example of some goals that can be advanced by data governance. Obviously, this is not the end all, but these are just some examples. I'll point some out. So a good one, in my opinion, is being able to establish your stewards and owners. In this example, it's in the pilot, but just overall, establishing your data stewards and your owners for your data sets is very crucial for your data governance, because without that ownership um, for your data, people don't know who to turn to if they want to understand both the context, understand the context of the data, understand who's responsible for it. If there's problems with the data, who do they turn to? If they want to get access to the data as well. So to me, that's a really good goal to establish, and metrics to put around as you build out your program. A couple other ones you may want to consider are more technical in nature. They tend to be things around connecting and configuring to data sources. That's very common. And here we have an example of Snowflake. Also, your BI environment. So those are examples from a technical standpoint that you may want to consider to put in there as well. And then another one specifically really around Alation is the curation of objects is something you may want to definitely want to consider and put in. How many objects have been curated by since the implementation of your application? How much is done by steward? How much is done weekly or monthly? So those are good. That's a good metric to definitely have in your program. The next section we're going to discuss is data policies. After this section, we're going to have a demo and then take a short break. But this will be the first section we're going to address within the Alation environment. After I've explained a little bit about what data policies are, Sean will step in and run the demo for us on how data policies are both developed, initiated, and used within Alation. So data policies, and then I referred to earlier, and you see a couple of highlights here across 4 sections. And earlier, when I explained the active data governance framework, I explained it around there is steps like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6, but they don't always go in a uniform manner. In other words, when you're dealing with policies, these policies will address different areas, and maybe when they implement those policies, they're going to address these different areas at the same time. So that's why when you see these different highlights and you say, oh, policies are addressing both the populate the data catalog, curate the assets, apply policies and controls, and monitor and measure, is because this section policies, when you really start implementing, are really going to address multiple areas of your active data governance framework. So real quick, what policy terminology is. Um, so what is a policy? So we can talk about long-winded definitions, but here I think a visual probably plays a little bit better into the discussion. That is, policy is really around compliance and how it drives into other areas. So you can have policies that address rules and regulations, standards, privacy, standard operating procedures, transparency controls, etc. So policies should be thought of at sort of at the highest level of when you're developing, and I'm going to call them rules, I would say. But when you're developing rules for anything, the policy is the highest level of a rule. That's how I kind of think about it. Before and below that, you'll have like possibly standards, an operating procedure, et cetera. But in essence, policy really dictates everything at a high level, what needs to be done. And for data governance and how it's applied to data, this is going to be really crucial as you move forward with your program. So Gartner has a couple of different areas in terms of kind of policy types that can be used. You can have policies for quality, privacy, security, ethics, definitions, models, policies for life cycle. So the policies, you can have policies for numerous different areas. This is just an example, but you can have other examples as well. Not just in these areas, but other areas. For example, access policies is a very popular area that sits sometimes outside of security. But these are some of the key policy types that you can manage, monitor, and then apply within your program. So we talked a little bit about policies when we looked at policies, how they address different areas. This is a policy hierarchy. In a policy hierarchy, we have the traditional triangle where we have 5 different sections. So we have our general policies, and when I talked about earlier about how policies are at the highest level, this is what I was referring to. And then you have standards, and after standards, you may have policies that are very particular to a certain area. In this case, you have a data policy, but the data policy is always a subordinate to the general policies and the standards of your organization. After which you have controls, and then audit. So controls are kind of like the rules of the policy, how each of the areas of the policy gets applied within, in this case, data. So as you look at these arrows going up, so from all the way from the top to the bottom, we're looking at general policy, standards, data policy, controls, and audit. How they're the creation, the curation, upkeep. All of these sections follow that process. They follow the creation, the curation, and the upkeep of policy standards across an organization, and then the automation of those policies and the lineage of them. So when we're talking about policies, in particular, we're talking about data in this section, data policies. We really some key areas to talk about data policies are around these 6 pillars: data security, privacy, compliance, data enablement, data ops, and data quality. These are key areas, and each of these areas around policy um, tend to have um, very similar procedures. So there's going to be around that policy. You're going to have it's going to direct itself to metadata. How metadata is used. It's going to have terms that support it within glossaries. It's going to have a lineage, and then there's going to be analytics that support it. So when you look at this, referred to as a house of data, looking at data leadership and data architecture on the bottom, these are the key pillars that we want to have and address within our data policies. These will help you ensure that your program's successful. And then within each of these pillars, you're going to address from a policy standpoint, you're going to address those areas around metadata, around terms, definitions, and you're going to have analytics to support how those policies are being complied to. So, for some key principles to remember when we're talking about policy, and these come from Robert Seiner, who is a data governance guru. So the first one is data as an asset. Um, the second is data as a clear process and procedure. Data includes accountability, and data quality is all obviously important, and it should be embedded. So data as an asset is something is has that did not have a lot of awareness before, but really over the last, I would say, I don't know, 5, 6 years, you've really seen a movement to consider data. And you may have heard this term before: data is the new oil. Um, you've also there's people out there, Douglas Laney, for example, who talks about data. Um, um, Infonomics, it's his term that he uses, but data that can be monetized, the monetization of data. So, and data has to be viewed very differently than it was before. It's a reusable asset. It can be used both to address regulatory requirements, but the obvious one is to make money. The return on investment. What is that return on investment on data? And so, data should be treated like any other asset. It should not be treated like, oh, it's has no value, or it's not important, but it should be definitely treated with such high value. Obviously, you see, if you notice in the news over the last years, all the hacks that have occurred over the last 10 years, and the cost of those hacks, those breaches that have plagued companies. So we definitely seeing this movement to treat data as an asset, much like you would treat it like a piece of equipment if you were a manufacturing firm, but maybe even more, because data is something that's in a way renewable on a consistent basis, because it can be used for many different things. So it may even have even more value than that. So data, the second one is data having clear processes and procedures. So um, that is, I think, self-explanatory, because if there isn't any process or procedures around anything, it's going to fall apart. And data is definitely has to have that. This is where without those process and procedures, you don't know where your data is. You don't know who's responsible for the data. You don't understand why the data is transformed, why the data is kept in certain areas, who has access to it. So process and procedures are obviously very clear and need to be very clear, and they need to definitely be addressed. So data has to include accountability. So at the accountability phase, you're really looking at who's accountable for the data, who's the owner, who's the steward, who has that responsibility for ensuring that the data is secure, um, curated. Without that, the data is useless because then it can just sit without having someone who's accountable and someone who is going to apply the necessary principles to the data and the necessary governance to the data. And the last one is data quality. Sometimes we say that's obvious, but having the right data at the right time, um, and data that is correct is very important. So data quality plays a huge role in that. It has to be there from the beginning. It can't be an afterthought. We can't assume that our data has the highest level of quality. We have to always ensure that the data is being checked, that there's metrics applied to it, that there's controls around it for our end users. So a lean way in writing a policy. So I know that policy writing is probably not the most popular thing to do. It's obviously can take some time, and sometimes it's difficult to know if you've addressed everything. So for in this example, we this template, we're really giving some pointers out to what a policy has, and some of the recommendations. So definitely want a one-line description of what the policy is addressing. You don't want paragraphs after paragraphs because nobody's going to read it. You want to address the reasons for the policy. Be very, very specific about those reasons. The specifics of the policy. What exactly is the policy addressing? And then some links to the policy. If very, very important, specifically if that policy is referring to other policies or other standards, or other areas that may be need to be addressed within the policy, and some recommendations. Short and to the point on when you write it. Communicate it with bullets, tables, pictures, and diagrams as much as possible. You'd less. I think the less amount of words you use, the better. Uh, you want to avoid, as I just said, you want to avoid a lot of text. So not paragraphs of text, but get to the point very quickly and make it easy to understand. But not just understand, but make it easy to be actionable. There's nothing worse than a policy that you're reading and you have no idea what you've read and what you're supposed to do with it. So it has to be something, believe it or not, in this case, the more simpler, the better. Something that's somebody in high school could read. You don't want to make it to the point that you need an attorney to translate it for you, because then you're not going to get any action on that policy. So at this point, I am going to move it over to Sean to do a demo on how policies are addressed within Alation, how you can use policies to curate assets, for example, apply controls, and monitor and measure your program going forward. So let me end the show at this point and move this to Sean Glenn, who's going to now take over from me, and I'll let him do a short introduction of himself and then move to the demo. Sean, it's all yours.
Thanks, Salvador. Hey guys, as Salvador mentioned, my name is Sean Glenn. I've been working with data meeting for a couple of years now, and my role is basically a data catalog architect. I'm part of Salvador's data governance team, and have been working with Alation now for probably a year or so. And yeah, looking forward to kind of showing you some of the features, starting with data policies here, as well as some of the other topics we're going to cover here today. Okay, so let's get started here with giving you a little demo on policies and kind of how to the process of cataloging those within your Alation environment, and speak to some ideas about how you can start to apply those to different objects throughout your throughout the Alation site. Right now, we're just sitting on our homepage. The best way to go about navigating to your policies, your library of policies, is going to be coming up here to the little apps drawer button here. If we drop that down, you'll see there's an app here called Govern, and this is where your policy center is going to live among a few other objects here, which we'll actually touch on a little bit later on in the webinar. So I'm going to click into policies here. And the first thing you're going to see is basically two main sections. We're going to have up top here your policy groups, and down below the policies themselves. So right away, pretty straightforward. If you're used to working with any sort of glossaries, this is going to kind of follow the same logic here, which is down at the bottom, you're going to start building and creating all of the policies that are going to exist within your organization. But over time, you're going to realize that a lot of these policies are going to start to be related to each other in some way. If you remember back to the slide Salvador had shared before, a lot of those are going to come back to something along the lines as what we saw with the Gartner categories when it comes to policies. So you can see we've kind of got a lot of those already embedded into our environment. I'm sure in your environment, you're going to have something similar, or it's going to branch off into different types of groups or expand upon those. But you can see in our environment, it's pretty straightforward and pretty simple. So as you start to create these, definitely going to be helpful to start to group these into groups so that you can kind of start to see all of the related policies. So if anyone is browsing, trying to get an understanding of the policies to be aware of, if they're looking for policies in a particular area, having these groups is going to allow them to kind of sift through those a little bit more efficiently. And any of your browsers or any of your viewers on your Alation site are going to have access to this so they can kind of educate themselves, or you can help point them to this page so they can kind of get an understanding if they're looking to use a particular object. Hey, here's what you're going to need to be aware of. I'll click into a policy here just to kind of give you an example of what a page is going to look like. The bulk of this page is really always going to be the main description section here, starting to list out a lot of those bullets that Salvador had just went over, right? Trying to let your end users understand, hey, exactly what is this policy? What is it all about? What's its purpose? As well as listing out exactly some of the statements that are going to be involved in what you're going to have to adhere to. Just like any other page that you're going to come to throughout the catalog site, you're going to have a whole column here on the right-hand side that's going to allow you to start to kind of further classify and label and build out some extra content that's going to be helpful for the user to understand. Definitely going to be important to have some sort of steward or owner that's going to be assigned to this policy so users know who to reach out to if they have any other further questions or concerns or maybe some suggestions. It's also just good to have it's good assurance to know that someone's also in charge, as over time there might need to be changes and tweaks made to this policy, whether it's just internal decisions with your company, or there might be perhaps policies that your company needs to adhere to based on city, state, or federal laws. So obviously policies are going to trickle down into that area, and you're going to need to make sure that your policies reflect those of those government entities. And so you're going to have to make those changes. So making sure someone's in charge of that's keeping up with that is going to be important. Another thing similar to other object types throughout the Alation instance is you do have the ability to start to customize this out a little bit. In this case, our policy template right now, you can see it's just called type. It's just the out of the box policy template, but you have the ability to build different layouts that might fit a little bit better for the needs of your particular policy type. So thinking about those policy groups, you might have a series of policies that are all going to need to follow the same type of format to help just make it easier for your users to come in and pick up on certain sections that they're looking for or need to be aware about. So just know when you come here, the description section itself is pretty robust, where you can start to kind of build this out in a way that's easy on the eye to read, whether it's just having headers or bullets. You can actually start to build in or embed tables, videos, and other external links all there to kind of just give as much information to your end user as possible so they can really answer their own questions and have a clear understanding of what this policy is all about and to what objects they're going to need to be aware of, to what objects this is going to apply to. Speaking of those objects, down here in the bottom right corner, this is a great way to start to get a sense of, hey, what are all of the objects that this policy is currently being applied to, and allows you to actually just start to, these are all hyperlinked for you to quickly jump to those if you're looking to browse for a particular object there. Another key thing in terms of the governance side of this, right? It is important throughout your Alation site to make sure you kind of have full control over what objects are allowed to be edited and by which users are, and which users are allowed to edit those. Obviously, policies are going to be something that you're going to, if there's ever going to be any changes need to be made to, you want to make sure there's only select users who have been approved to actually manage those. You don't want any person to come in here and make their own tweaks like it's a Wikipedia page. You kind of want to have this a little bit more locked down. And in this top right corner here, you're going to have the option to actually update your access settings. And so you can see here at the moment, in our case, we've got this set to public, which is actually being inherited by the from the policy group. You have the option to toggle this on or off. Best recommendation always to just leave that on if you're going to push that to a policy group. But in general, I would say, though we have public set up here where anyone can come in and edit and view, you're most likely going to want to have this actually switch to being in this middle option here, which is going to be edited restriction, which allows you to, and let me actually switch over and show you if I switch to the group here. Let's do this. I manage the policy group access settings, and I click into the middle option here and make this edited restriction. Now this is going to update to allow any user to still come to this page, as well as any of the child private policies that are part of this group, to be able to see what the policies are and read into those, so they can still come here and get an understanding of what each policy is. But now we have the ability to actually set who are the actual users who are going to be able to edit this particular policy group or any of the policies that are going to be sitting within this group. So definitely a feature that you want to take advantage of as you're building out your library of policies, so that nothing is going to get changed without going through the appropriate approval process. You do have the option to make this fully private if there are certain policies or groups of policies that you want to have just kind of kept to a particular set of users. In general, right, the Alation catalog and catalogs in general, the goal there is to try and help end users find everything that's available to them. But obviously, there's still going to be certain objects or things that are just really not related to particular users. So to help remove, perhaps remove some clutter from the site, this could be an option that you look into. But I find in most cases that the editing restricted option there is going to be your best bet. Okay, in terms of actually, once you've built out your policy and you've kind of updated all the context in terms of the description and as well as some of these labels here on the side, what you're probably going to next want to do is actually start applying these particular objects. So as any user is browsing throughout the site, as they come to any object page, let's say they're looking at a particular table and they're thinking about actually using this for some sort of project, some sort of task, maybe embedding that as an input for a workflow that they're building out, right? It's probably going to be smart for them to be aware of any policies that are attached to that. So if I click in, I think this is one I have an example on, actually. Might not be the best. Let me go back. So if I come back to my PII, right, personal identifiable information, right, I want to make sure if there's any tables that are having any of that information, right, date of birth, passport numbers, driver license numbers, right, all of that sensitive information, I want to make sure that that has been applied to the particular table or in any of those objects that it should be. So one way to do that, there's a couple of manual ways. I find the best way to go about it is actually just coming to this page. If, let's say I'm in charge of this particular table, hey, I know there's sensitive information in here. And so if anyone else wants to use this table, I need to make sure that they're aware that there is sensitive information in there. You can obviously take advantage of the description section and actually write that out yourself. There's also different ways you can start to tag, right? So I can actually embed, and maybe if I'm writing this sentence out, say, hey, be aware this table contains, and I might just leave it at that and kind of embed that as part of the sentence there. So now this is going to be kind of front and center, as well as a hyperlink to allow that person to jump to the policy page itself if they're not aware of what that actually entails. I find the policy section over here on the right is also one of the best ways to kind of start to call out any of those policies. Sometimes these description sections can become pretty lengthy, and thus it's kind of hard if users don't actually scan the whole thing carefully line by line and really comprehend what the description's all about. And so something as important as a policy that regarding personal identifiable information, you definitely don't want that to be lost. So sometimes this right-hand column here definitely allows some of those labels and classifications and certain policies and definitely policies, those kind of stand out and pop out here on the page a little bit more. So anyone who has the ability to come into this page and actually make updates to this page is going to have the ability to actually update the policy section here. And you can see we've got a few different policies. If I wanted to add another one, it would be just as simple as just clicking that one. And there you go. And now we have 2 policies applied to this page. So that's an example of how you can come to any object page and start applying policies there. There is also the ability to kind of do this a little bit more in bulk from a manual perspective, where if I come to an advanced search and I'm going to select off a number of items here, I have the ability to actually, well, in this case, add or remove policies. So if you're performing an advanced search with a number of filters here, you want to apply a blanket policy to all of those search results. This is a place where you can come to and actually apply those, kind of speed up the process instead of going one by one. But there is another way where you can kind of start to, if you remember the slide with the Salvador had shared with the pyramid and the types of policies, right? One of those red arrows on the side kind of talked about automation. And there is some of that capability here within the Alation site. And so I'm going to show you that now. If I come back to, actually, if not anyone's going to be able to do this, you're going to need to be at least a catalog admin, but there's something called catalog sets. And basically, this is going to be a place where you can start to build some logic into the Alation site to start to apply context to your objects automatically based on parameters that you set. So we have one here that's existing already relating to this PII policy, right? And so basically what's going on in here is we can create rules that say, in this particular case, we've created this rule for directly for columns, but you can do this at the schema level or at the table level here. And you can say, based on any columns, and so what's going on here is we've got, I want to make sure that all columns throughout all of the tables that we've ingested into our Alation environment, if there's any columns that I think are related to PII, I want to be able to apply and add that policy to that page. Now, as you're ingesting tables, right, you might be connecting to a number of data sources that might have hundreds to thousands of tables, and those tables might have hundreds to thousands of columns, right? So immediately you're trying to figure out, is there a faster way to do this? And catalog sets are going to be your answer in this case. So in this page, this is going to allow me to say, hey, Alation, I want you to go and find all columns throughout my Alation environment that match any of these column headers that I'm placing in here. And in this case, the delimiter here is going to be a little pipe. So you can see anytime there's a table that contains social security numbers, SSN, birth dates, passport, anything regarding to ethnicity or race, right? I only have a handful of in here, but you can obviously keep this list going. I can say, hey, first of all, go find any columns that have this object or have these column headers. Once you've found those, on the second tab here, we're going to say, here's what we're going to tell Alation to start to apply. So in this case, I'm going to say, hey, anything that contains those column headers, I want you to actually apply. In this case, we have 2 different policies that we're applying. You can make it as small as just adding one little item here, or you can actually build out and actually fill out a lot of any of the other fields that you're seeing here that exist in all of those columns or all of those column pages. So if I wanted to make updates to the description, stewards, right, any of that applies. But in this case, I'm interested in particularly adding those policies. I have that capability to do that here. Once you've set that, immediately what you're going to see back on this overview and rules tab is it's going to populate a list of all of the columns that it found. So in this case, our environment's not that huge. And based on the criteria I'd set, it came back with 5 results. So what's going on here is for all 5 of these columns that Alation found, it is going to automatically apply those policies. And I can see that if I open up, let's say this birth date, right? I can see some of the information here about what table this column sits in, and obviously the rest of the path with regards to schema and data source. If I click on this birth date column, I can see that this has automatically been applied. And I know that it's been automatically applied. If you remember when I was on the table earlier, we did see under the policy section that I had the PII listed, but you'll see one new little icon here that didn't exist before, and that's this little gear icon. So if I hover over that, you'll see that this is an indicator that says this is a policy that has been applied by a particular catalog set. And I can actually jump to that catalog set by using the hyperlink there. So this is a huge feature on the Alation site that definitely is going to be helpful for you to apply those policies to make sure you're really covering all of your bases. Certainly as you're ingesting all of that volume into your Alation site, this is going to be a great way for you to efficiently start to apply those policies to all of those objects that are going to be related to that policy, so you can make sure that your end users are really getting all of the needed information they're getting as they're browsing throughout your Alation site. So that pretty much covers everything I wanted to share with you guys today. Again, we kind of talked about how to simply just navigate to the policy center and start to build out your policy library, as well as putting those into particular groups to make it easier, to make the search process easier, as well as start to apply these policies to a number of objects, whether that's individually or going through it manually one by one, or actually kind of using an automated process to kind of help expedite the process of applying those policies. So that's all I had for you guys today on the policy. Salvador, I will popcorn it back to you. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to it, or if that covers this portion.
No, thank you, Sean. I think we covered everything on policies. Next section is data quality. We'll start that in a couple of minutes. Okay, thank you for coming back to our webinar. Our next section is data quality. So data quality obviously is one of the key areas around any data governance program. Obviously, without data quality, you really cannot do your job very well. Data quality is essential to the fitness of an organization from the simple standpoint on what it's going to deliver to regulators, if that's the purpose of your data, what decisions are going to be made at the highest levels by your chief executive officers, the financial reporting from a financial side. So data quality is one of the core areas that any data governance program has to address. And within Alation, it has definitely a unique area. Because Alation gives you a lot of possibilities around this. So through the curation of assets, applying policies and controls, driving the collaboration of the community, and monitoring and measuring, you can really do and work a lot with and apply data quality within Alation. So in the next section, we're going to discuss not about so much data quality, but kind of like what data quality looks like, both from a life cycle and from how people tend to view it depending on where they're at in their data quality journey. So let's start with looking at this slide. We have a couple of different areas here. So we have clueness, awareness, emerging, managed, and with managed we have data at rest and data in flight. So this represents sort of I would say, a maturity of data quality for an organization. So let's look at the first section. So clueless. So clueless is exactly what it says. You don't have any idea what your data means. You don't understand the context. You don't even know if it's any good. And not only that, but really nobody cares, which I think that's not probably something anybody could believe that is occurring in any organization. But if you're at that stage, you're in the clueless stage. As probably the best meme I have here is probably when someone asks what DQ means, you think of Dairy Queen. So it's definitely an area you don't want to be in. It's the lowest level of maturity in your data quality program, but it's someplace that should definitely be avoided at all costs. The next phase of what I would call the maturity life cycle of data quality in terms of a program is awareness. And here's where you're aware that you definitely need data quality. You have some sort of understanding of what data quality is. However, there's really no formal processes. Everything's done in an ad hoc manner. A lot of things are manual. There is a perception that the data is correct, which is very common in organizations. Yeah, I think the data is good, but when in fact the data probably isn't that good. However, there is an understanding of kind of what data quality is, but obviously not the application of it has a lot to be desired. I would say at this level, you'll find not the majority, but a good amount of organizations sit in this area. Your organization might sit in this area, or might not, or it might have aspects, some points that come from this area, but not all. So, but it's not uncommon that you'll find some of these bullet points in organizations. Specifically, the ad hoc reporting is very common, where there is no formal data quality reporting. The third maturity phase is sort of the emerging phase. This is where um, you're looking at data quality rules. You have some rules. You probably do some reporting through some SQL statements or through some other form of scripting writing. You probably understand or have a good idea of the major issues in your organization, but you're probably, maybe not definitely, but you're probably not remediating those issues as well as you can. I mean, you may address them at a very high level, have an idea, but you definitely are not have a program that you could say, hey, we're definitely got these issues under control. But at least you're reporting on the data. At least you have that area covered. The fourth and final area is sort of your managed data. So at the managed data, you really now are addressing data from a very formal and systematic manner. So you've got probably some data quality tools that are actually profiling the data. You probably have some dimensions and metrics. You're applying data metric rules to your data after you've profiled. You definitely have your data stewards defined so that they understand and they're responsible for certain data sets. Within that, you probably have some data that so you're managing your data both at rest and in flight. So you have data quality that's deployed. When data is in flight, you're modifying those rules. You're monitoring results on dashboards, so that's being done. And you definitely have data quality for data when it's at rest or in flight, depending on the state of the data. So this are what I would call the 4 stages or 4 maturity levels of data. It also categorizes probably where you may sit, and you may sit in a couple of these areas as well. So it's not obviously mandatory that you just completely sit one, but you'll find yourself, you possibly, hey, we've got some reporting, but we do have dimensions that we're using, or we have a dashboard that we're reporting on, but we don't have the rules set up. We haven't really defined data quality rules for data in flight, but we do have for data rules for something that's in storage. So that varies according to organization. But this is when you're looking at data quality in terms of that maturity. This is kind of the very common areas that you'll see. Now let's pop over to data quality dimensions. So I think people are familiar. They may have heard of the data quality dimensions. Here we have 6 data quality dimensions, and I would say they're the popular dimensions. Now, believe it or not, there's something like, I think I've heard some organizations have over 50 or 60 dimensions that they use, but for the most part, 6 dimensions are what's commonly used, and these are the classical ones: consistency of your data, how accurate your data is, how timely is your data, is your data complete, is it unique, and does it conform? So these are the classical data dimensions, and usually you build your metrics off of each of these dimensions as you move forward, and you define the targets for what good data looks like for each of these dimensions. So this goes into a little bit more detail of this slide. We go a little more detail in terms of data quality dimensions. We describe each of them. We give examples of each. I won't talk to each one of these, but let me point out 2 of my favorite ones for a couple of reasons. One is completeness, and the other one is timeliness. So for completeness, is the data is a broader attribute, complete in context. For example, you've got your classical address, street, country, et cetera. Is that all that information there? So if you have columns of data, one with an address, with a city, region, postal code, are each one of those fields complete, or is it a partial postal code, or a city field's missing, etc. And the other one I like to point out is timeliness. Why do I like to point out? Because is the data at the right place at the right time? In other words, when someone needs the data, can they get it? And so for me, those two dimensions are so important. I mean, they're all important, but these are always when it comes to reporting, timeliness is so valuable. So is data provided on time on both when it's created and the updates on that data? And there's some examples there. For example, credit checks every 90 days, excuse me, tax ID provided within 30 days of sale order, et cetera, at the point of close. So those two are two dimensions I've always looked at. Obviously, your accuracy of data is the other one that is, for me, after those is highly important. But these give you an example of what we're looking at when we're talking about data quality dimensions, the examples. And under these, you can have many metrics under each of these. So many rules behind each of these dimensions. So that depends on your organization. It depends on the type of data you're dealing with. It depends on the industry. So they're going to vary, all depending on those attributes. So data quality API and open framework. So any DQ tool, the information, it can be mirrored in the catalog. So with in this example, Alation, Alation can really take any DQ tool. So if you're talking about like Soda or Animalo or Telmy, or tools, for example, that can observe your data through the data pipeline, report on that data, and can surface that data through a catalog using the data quality API. So these are some examples of an open framework that is applied in Alation that can use and leverage data quality tools that already exist. So with that said, we're going to jump into the demo here, the data quality demo. Oops, let me stop presenting and turn this over to Sean, who's going to jump into our data quality demo at this time. Sean, take it away.
Thanks, Salvador. All right, so with regards to data quality and utilizing Alation to support in that effort, there's a few different features I would say that Alation provides us that I'm going to start to point out here. Thinking back to the one of the first slides that Salvador went over there with the talking about where organizations might be currently existing in that data quality and maturity life cycle, right? There's a couple things out of the box that I think Alation has, which can help just about anyone kind of start putting some data quality checks in there, or at least labels for end users. So those would be something called trust check flags. And then there's also going to be the ability to bring in data sampling, and as well as doing some data profiling. So those are a couple of the things that I think, even if you're not that sophisticated yet in data quality, those are a couple of things that Alation provides you out of the box that you can start taking advantage of that are pretty straightforward. So let me start with the trust check flags. And this is something that, as anyone's going to be browsing throughout the site, and so at the moment I'm just kind of jumping into, let's say, just a basic advanced user search here, right? As I start browsing for different data objects that are sitting on our Alation site, there's going to be something kind of sitting here in this first column that is going to kind of stick out to me, and is going to be very helpful to help assure me, or help guide me in using certain objects over others, or at least being aware of, hey, if you're going to be utilizing a particular data object here, at least something to be aware of. So there are three types of trust check flags. If I click into one here, we can see that basically at the top of every, basically almost every object page, there's going to be three different trust check flags. One is going to be color-coded green, and that's going to represent that this object has been endorsed. The second one is going to be anything that is in yellow is going to be just a simple warning. And that warning could be, some people might jump to a conclusion and think that that means that there's something wrong with the particular data object. That's not necessarily true. It's really something you'll have to look into to see what the warning is all about. Because sometimes it might be, hey, this is good to go, just be aware of X, Y, and Z, right? And then the last one here is going to be deprecation. So in this case, this is something that someone is telling you, hey, this actually should not be used, whether it's currently under development or there was some sort of error caught or found with that data source object, or maybe it's just perhaps outdated and is being sunset and just no longer something that's in use, but has yet to be actually removed or archived that away from the Alation instance. So there might be a number of reasons for any of these three trust check flags to be updated. But regardless, whatever the update is, it's going to be helpful for the end user to know a little bit more context than if they didn't have these. So if I'm browsing just throughout the Alation site and I come up with a search result list, right away, this is going to be one of the first things that I'm looking for to see, hey, is this something I'm interested in? And oh, great, it's actually been endorsed by at least one user, maybe multiple users. The more endorsements something has, the more trust I'm going to be able to start to build from the start without even looking into a data source and seeing what's inside of it. I'm already going to have a little bit of a foundation of trust that, hey, this is probably something that if it's something related to what I'm looking for, I can trust that it's going to have gone through some sort of peer review process, whether that's a data quality check or has gone through the necessary curation process in the Alation site for me to actually be able to start seriously considering using this or continuing down this rabbit hole of this given data source. So you can see we've got a number of endorsed objects here. You can see that a couple of these actually have not just an endorsement, but also a warning that goes with it. And so that might be something as a, hey, just be aware of if you're going to continue to use it, that's fine. Just make sure you're aware of this warning. Now, if I click into one of these, you can see this actually has 7 endorsements, which is great. Actually, I might have just counted that up, added to that count there a little bit, but we can see all of the people that have currently endorsed this. So ideally, as you're browsing certain sources, you're going to know the other colleagues of yours that are either stewards or owners or experts in this particular data object. And so if I start to see their names populate here, that's going to give me that insurance that I'm looking for. Now, the warnings, as you can see, this actually, if you were following us with our policy portion of the webinar earlier, you can see that this actually is getting an automatic population from the PII data policy. So in this case, we can see that Darren actually updated everyone to say, hey, before you use this, just be aware that there's sensitive information in this table, and you want to make sure that you're being careful as you're using this table for whatever the task it is, that you're not doing it with any negligence, that you're actually being conscious of the data that's involved and making sure that it's not being abused in any way. So the warnings are great. You can come in here and add a warning and add a comment and deliver whatever the message is you want to your end users so that they're aware of that message. And it's the same thing when it comes to the deprecate. You're also able to add messages in here explaining to your users why you've actually added this particular update. So trust check flags right out of the box are going to be great ways for you to start to, as you're beginning your curation of your site and adding descriptions and all the other context around your data objects. For your end users, this is really going to be one of the first things they see and are hoping to see as they're browsing throughout the site and considering looking into any of your data objects. So pretty straightforward. Color-coded system, endorse, warn, deprecate. One good thing to know about one good feature I have found when it comes to the deprecation of objects is if I were to click into one, and I'm just going to do a little test here for you guys. Oh, that's not a good example. If for some reason this particular object page needed to be deprecated out of date, I'm going to write that message. Now users can come and see what this message is all about and who actually added that. But we're also going to get a little update here on terms of the lineage view. And we'll get into lineage a little bit more in depth later on, but I wanted to just call this out here to let you guys know that anytime you deprecate something, any other data source objects that are downstream from this particular object that's now been deprecated are automatically going to be kind of outlined in red here in your lineage view. But also, if I were to, it's not letting me jump to this right now, but if I were to actually click to this object, I would actually get a warning on that object page that says, hey, an upstream object, and it would list the object itself has been deprecated, and just letting you know, hey, there is some sort of upstream issue going on or deprecation for some reason that this object is now downstream of that you need to be aware of. So that is definitely an important feature that when it comes to the trust check flags. Another thing that I would say requires a little bit of configuration to get started, but is pretty straightforward to do. You just need to work with your server admin is to ingest some of the sample data. Now that's definitely an optional feature. You don't have to do that. And for security purposes, there might be a number of sources that you don't want to ingest any sample data into the site. But you have that ability for you as well. And when it comes to data quality, right, we know that sometimes just an eye test itself might not be the full answer, but at least might kind of get you started. And if you're very familiar with a particular data source object, you might know what to expect, and having some sample data in there just for you to glance at might be super helpful. So if you have that configuration turned on and enabled, and you've scanned those sources, you'll get on the overview tab here, you'll get a section with some sample content, and you actually even have the ability to either click this basically link here to expand, or you can switch over to the column, the samples tab up here, and actually see a little bit more in depth of the sample data that's being brought in. So again, in terms of the mindset of data quality here and the data quality maturity, even if you're not a sophisticated data quality user yet, and you don't have a program built out, you have a couple of these out of the box features to allow you to kind of just get a quick sense of what's going on with some of your data. All right, so moving on a little bit further. Actually, if I were to, there's one more thing I wanted to see if, actually, no. I'm sorry, actually, here we go. So along the lines of data sampling, you have the ability to also do some profiling of the data, which is just going to kind of give you some of the sample of those data values within the column, as well as also give you some of the frequency. Now, in this particular case, right, we've got a view ID, so I wouldn't expect there to be multiple IDs necessarily. I guess it depends on the source, but in this case, we can see some of the sample frequency. So if you also wanted to just get a quick glance and you were expecting a set of recurring values, right, this would be a great place for you to kind of just quickly check in on that as you drill down into the column level. All right, so another feature that Alation has built in here is going to be called your data health. As you start to browse objects, you'll see this health tab here at the end. And depending on the rules and policies that you have in place and the data quality metrics that you're looking to apply to a number of your different objects, you can actually kind of start to integrate that into your Alation instance here. And just by browsing, start to get a glance at how those data quality metrics are holding up across all of your data sources that you've applied those metrics to. So you can see in this case that we have 3 different data quality metrics that are being applied to this channel views table. And we can see that it looks like by the status column here, we've got 2 of those 3 are actually fine. It's satisfactory, it's sufficient. There's no problems there, but we do have one issue here with regards to the ratings column. And if I wanted to look into a little bit further with regards to this particular rule, kind of going back to our policy library, right? This is a place you can continue to build out and include a lot of these rules that you're looking to apply. So if I wanted to know why this particular column didn't meet the criteria, I can start to see, okay, well, what's going on here? We can see we've got a scoring methodology. We can see percent scores, statuses on what those, depending on the score itself, what that gets categorized as, and get any other context that's relevant to my my table here. So having the data health is definitely going to be a great feature to kind of start building out rules and metrics that you don't have to necessarily jump to your data source for. You can actually kind of view that from within the Alation site itself and not have to leave it to kind of get an update of what's going on within that particular data table. And obviously, this is something that you want to be something that's a living feature, right? And this is the health tab is going to be something that allows it as you schedule out your data scan, your data source metadata scans on a routine basis. This is something that's also going to be scheduled as well. That's going to allow you to get up-to-date information on what's going on in any of those tables. Okay, the last thing I wanted to show is you might be working with some data quality sources that or data quality tools that you're looking to integrate. And I think there was a slide that Salvador had showed at the end there and talking about APIs, right? And so that is definitely something that Alation is has built out as part of the Alation site, is the ability to connect to some of your data quality tools and embed that into your Alation instance. So we're looking at here just kind of a fact sheet. And in this particular case, we've actually are utilizing the Anomalo data quality tool and have ingested that and have integrated that into our Alation site here. So for this is a table that on our Anomalo site, we've actually built out some data quality metrics, integrated that into Alation so that as we're browsing to this particular table page, we can actually get a quick glance on how that is actually performing and actually jump to that within our anomalous site itself and see exactly what's going on. So if there was anything in that particular data quality section here that stood out to me and I needed to take a closer look, I can just quickly hop to that page and get a clear look of what's going on. So you can see this is actually running on a daily basis. And as of late, we've actually been getting some error messages. And now I can actually jump to action here and start to resolve this issue. And so you can see how integrating this and starting to automate this is going to be a huge lift for you to stay up to date. And we're going back to some of those dimensions that Salvador had pointed out in those data quality slides, right? Some of those are timeliness, completeness, right? Those are all going to be key things so that when a user comes along and wants to start to use a particular data source, that they know right away, yes or no, that it's something that's ready to go and be used at that moment in time. Or if there's something wrong that needs to be fixed, that we can at least start to diagnose that root cause and start to resolve that as fast as possible, thus expediting the life cycle of that issue and getting that user back up and running to be able to use that table for whatever their project is. Okay, so that pretty much covers everything I wanted to go over with data quality within your Alation instance. So hopefully that was helpful. And with that being said, I will leave it there.
Thank you, Sean. Next area that we're going to cover is data lineage. We're going to take a very short break and we'll come back with data lineage. Thank you. Okay, thank you for coming back. Well, now we're back in the next stage of our webinar, which is we'll be discussing data lineage here. Kind of going off of what Sean discussed earlier around data quality. He showed you a little glimpse of data lineage, where he showed the deprecation of data when the data set's deprecated a table, for example. It shows a lineage of where it's going to affect it throughout your whole data pipeline. So that's a little bit of a sample of data lineage. And with that, we're going to pop right into what is data lineage, why we need data lineage, its impact, and then Sean's going to go through a short demo on data lineage within Alation and how that can enable you to improve your program and your data as you move forward. So a little bit about data lineage. So I think it's a little bit self-explanatory, right? Lineage is about the connection of an object to through time, in essence, or how it's connected to other objects through time. And you can use that pretty much in a lot of different subjects. But in terms of data, we're really looking at how data moves through a data pipeline within an organization. So how data moves from, let's say, one application, how when it's ingested, and it moves into each of the process and steps that it might go through in an organization. So a classical way of looking at most organizations, something gets ingested into a source application, it moves through some ETL process, it moves to a data warehouse, an example, another ETL process may occur, and then it moves into a reporting layer. So that's kind of a classical way of looking at data data pipeline. Obviously, they can get much more complex than that, especially now that we have different different data architectures, everything from SOA to microservices, through now data product architectures. So that obviously could get more complex, but you get the idea. The lineage is how that data moves throughout that pipeline. So what does data lineage support? So we understand that data lineage is about how it moves through an organization. So why understanding that is important to the business? So because one, it can support the trust of the data. So this goes back to a little bit of data quality. So if you know where the data went through and you know that certain changes occurred in certain areas and you only know that through lineage, then you can understand, okay, why did a change occur? So it gives you that ability to go back and see that. So a lot of audits, in this example, our Sarbanes-Oxley it's very important for Sarbanes-Oxley reporting. That provenance allows us to understand that. Also, users can see where the data came from and why and how and who modified that data for example. So if they understand if the data has been modified and they're going to use it in its modified form, they're going to want to know, okay, why was this modification occurred? Well, what was the reason? Understanding the context can assist that the next user to know, okay, I see why this happened and I can use the data in this way, or they might have to go back to the original source if that's something they need to do. Um, but only lineage will tell them, where those changes, the modifications may have occurred. So also the other area where it's important is in the impact analysis. When you follow the that whole data lineage, it tells you the impacts along that whole pipeline. So what exactly how it affects each of those areas. And I think I mentioned ETL routines, the queries that make occur about that data throughout a pipeline, the dashboards or the reporting that occurs at the end. So all these are areas that data lineage can address. So we just referred to data impact analysis report. So the downstream effects of what occurs when you make a change to the data is something that within Alation, you can see very clearly. We saw a sample of it. We're going to see more here very shortly. But when you look at the impact analysis report within Alation, it tells you everything downstream of what's going to happen if you make a change here to all the downstream objects. You can also report on based upon the BI reports as well as how the data flows in columns where there is lineage metadata in Alation. So on the reporting side, you're able to see those flows through the columns, through lineage metadata, so that it can assist you in your analysis. It can assist you when you in terms of, okay, if you're selecting certain object types, how that's going to look, and also the different steps. So these are some of the areas that an impact analysis report can assist you on. Obviously, it has other areas that it addresses. This can also help you in terms of understanding quality. Is a one afterthought on that. Is an impact analysis can help you there as well. Also understand ownership, who the different owners may be throughout, and then kind of address your those owners or stewards based upon that. So those are some of the side aspects. Now, with that said, we are going to move right to the demo, and I'm going to turn it over back to Sean here, who is going to jump us to our demo. Oops, it's not what I wanted to see. Here we go.
Great, thanks, Salvador.
Sean, take it away.
Yep. Thanks. All right, so data lineage. Goal here is just to show you kind of what this looks like in the Alation environment. As Salvador pointed out, definitely something that is always a top feature anytime someone is looking to acquire a data catalog. We're all some people learn in different ways. Visualization is definitely one of those key ways that kind of helps things sink in. So seeing the path of the journey of the data from source to target is always going to be helpful to really pinpoint certain bottlenecks or any errors that come up along the way, or just to get a general sense of where the source is that you're looking at for the end dashboard, right? So when I browse to a particular table, we're coming back to our channel views table here. You'll see one of the tabs along the way here is going to be our lineage tab. Out of the box, this is going to be something that most likely is going to be just kind of grayed out, right? It's not going to be available there. you are going to have to make sure that you run a query log ingestion across against your data sources to be able to pull in that needed information for Alation to read through and be able to start to map out that lineage, right? It's going to start to pick up on all of those queries to know what it's being pulled against and with and joined with and all of that stuff, so that it can properly map out that visualization for you. So let me switch over to the lineage tab here, and you can see right away we've actually got two sections here. So this top section is probably what your eyes are drawn to first. You have the ability to zoom out here a little bit depending on how in depth this lineage view is and how wide it gets. But you can see we're looking at front and center here is our channels view table. And you can see both what's upstream and downstream from this particular table and everything that it's connected to. In this case, we do have the ability to use this drop-down arrow to take a quick glance at the columns that are involved in there. And you would also see the lineage view throughout the lineage, the path of the columns as well, if you were interested in that. One cool feature that I think is cool, and this speaks to the below the fold portion of the page that seems a little bit empty right now. But if I wanted to click into another page, I can click on this data source object here, which is downstream from our channels view, and actually get a quick snapshot on that data object page itself, which at the moment looks like it's pretty basic. There's not a whole lot of stuff going on in here, but if I wanted to quickly get a glance at the description or any of the other maybe custom fields or labels that have been applied to that object, it's really cool that Alation has built that out in here, so you don't actually have to jump to that page unless you really wanted to, but you can take a look at that within the same page here. Now, in this particular example, if you were following our previous section here around data quality, right, I had talked about the trust check flags. And in this particular case, right, we have a deprecation. It looks like this particular case, we've got this table is actually out of sync for some reason. So that has been deprecated for the moment to not just warn users, but actually prevent or to guide users away from using this table, at least for this period of time until this gets fixed. And so automatically, once you deprecate this, Alation is going to go downstream and actually highlight all of those objects in red as well. So that if anybody was browsing to this particular page, which I'll jump to here, right? This is now the next table down, or this is a view coming off of this table, right? If I were to come to this page, right, I'm not going to have a deprecation feature here, but what's going to actually populate automatically is we're going to get a warning now. And if I open up this, the trust check flags, I get a little bit more information. I'm going to see a message here that says warning propagated from the deprecation of, and here's our channels view table. So that's going to be a huge feature that any user now, they don't even have to know that this, or they don't have to be even in the path of finding the channels views. This might not be something that they're even looking for. They might be just looking for some sort of dashboard down the stream. But by heading to any of those dashboards or further views or further tables, they're going to intersect with and see that same warning message that we saw for this view. They're going to see that on any other pages. So it's going to be really helpful. And for those users, right, as they come to the lineage, they're going to be able to backtrack and reverse engineer and look further upstream to figure out, okay, well, where did this warning come from? How far upstream is it? And where exactly is that source? And so anyone that perhaps came across that might be maybe the owner of one of these views or dashboards, they actually can find out the source themselves, come to that page, and actually maybe even alert the stewards that are involved on that if those stewards aren't already acting upon this particular error message itself or deprecated message itself. So in terms of the process of being notified on any problems with your data sources, as well as starting the process of collaboration or getting started on fixing those problems, the lineage view is going to be very helpful in uncovering that for you. And also that notification process. And then the couple other things I just wanted to point out here. I know Salvador had a slide that had a screenshot of it, but another view instead of the visual lineage view, you can actually have the ability to look at the view impact analysis, which you actually can, depending on how large this lineage view is and how many objects are tied to it, you actually might want to kind of filter out some of those objects and just filter that down to a list that's a little bit more bite-sized or digestible in that moment. And the other thing is you can actually export this to a CSV and perhaps maybe use that as an attachment in an email that you want to send out to someone or for whatever purposes you need. And it's a similar thing with the view upstream audit, same concept here. It's just going to provide you a list of all those objects upstream, same ability here for you to filter based on who the steward is, the object type. Maybe you just want to limit to it on how far upstream or downstream, what objects you want to include. All of that is kind of at your disposal there. And again, you can export that to a CSV and take that from there and use that to your advantage. So that's pretty much all there is to cover here for Lineage at this time, but it is, for the most part, it's pretty straightforward, but can be very powerful and effective. As you start to ingest all those query logs, your Lineage is going to become a lot more valuable, and you're going to be able to see everything you need to do for that data source from start to end. Salvador, that's what I got. I'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Sean. Next section, we're going to go through stewardship, and this is going to be almost like a composite of all these areas put together. We're going to take a short break and then continue on with that. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So the next section that we are going to address is data stewardship. And as I mentioned real shortly after Sean finished the last section on Lineage, stewardship really drives, is going to drive the success of your not only your data governance program, but your Alation implementation as well. So what does good stewardship look like? So stewardship, in essence, optimizes and defends how your data is being used throughout your organization. So it's going to support the business. It's going to support policies around data. It's going to support, to some extent, the quality of the data. It's going to support the description of the data. And it's going to make end users or users in general more efficient in how they use the data and how they find that data. So some of the other areas that are key is the data and assets can easily be verified. They're understandable. It is clear which data is the right data to use for reports and investigations. So that is very clear, but not just investigations. I would add what right data is used for business analysis, data science, etc. So these are some of the really good areas that good stewardship allows us to do and really optimizes. Another final point to make on this slide is there's no reinventing the wheel. So it's not that when you have good stewardship, you have somebody that really understands the data in their particular domain or their particular business unit. So it really allows you to have a mastery of your data in that area. And so you don't have to, if you don't have that mastery, you end up having to reinvent that wheel. You end up having to constantly redo it, a little bit like Groundhog Day, that it's every morning it's the same thing. And so good stewardship allows us to circumvent that. The other areas that good stewardship really enable us to address is, understand not only our data, but also the sensitivity of the data. We live, and I've mentioned in a couple of the previous slides and areas that we've already discussed, the importance of regulatory, especially specifically around PI data. With all the legislation that's arising lately, GDPR, and I've mentioned CCPA and other privacy laws that are rising in other countries. This is becoming such an important area that needs to be addressed. So the legislative aspect of data is an area that good stewardship will be able to address. This also allows us to address audits much easier. So having good stewardship allows us to address both internal and external audits. So if there's the internal auditors coming to understand how data is being used, or if who has access to it, this can be truly addressed immediately. And this also goes in line with addressing auditors. So if you have financial audits that are required, we've mentioned Sarbanes-Oxley as a good example. Good stewardship will enable that to occur and address in a much more efficient manner. It also allows us to address how data is going to be used. So the appropriate use, ensuring that the right data is used at the right time when someone needs it. So this is where good stewardship plays. I think probably its critical factor is because I think that really encompasses all these other areas around that we've discussed on data. So a little bit around how data stewards get organized, how things are organized in such a way within Alation that allows us to really empower everybody in an organization. So you have everything from, and I'm not going to go through all these areas, but as Sean's going to cover some of these areas in the demo. So, but just to give you a understanding, so data can be in domains, how it's organized, how it's structured. Data will be found in custom fields. You can use tags for data. Specific ways that data is tagged, they mean certain ways. Glossaries, data is where data is defined. You can collect data, or you can address, for example, data and policies around article groups, and then taxonomies as well, where you allow the ability to navigate through data much easier. And so all these areas, data stewardship is able to address. There's some pros and cons to each one of these, some examples of how that occurs. But this in essence is how your data will be organized within, or can be within Alation. So with that said, I will send it over to Sean, who will go through a short demo on how this occurs. Sean, take it away.
Thanks, Salvador. All right, so yeah, data stewardship. I mean, this is one rabbit hole you can go down for a long time. Like it's pretty expansive, and in the number of ways a steward can be supportive of the Alation site and building out content and curating it and being support to other consumers. We could really spend a ton of time here, but for this webinar's purpose, right, I'm just going to try and call out some key points, some things to highlight that I think are great for thinking about out of the box, getting started with your stewardship on the Alation site, as well as some of the more next things you might want to tackle, such as the sensitive data stuff that Salvador had mentioned before. So the mindset, I think a great mindset to be in is the acronym FUTURE that Alation has shared before. And basically FUTURE stands for find, understand, trust, use, and reuse, right? So when thinking about building out all of the descriptions and where to focus on first in your catalog and all the different custom fields you might need, if you kind of keep in mind what the end user's journey is like, right? First, they're just going to be trying to find the relevant sources that are related to their search. Then they need to start to understand what it is that they're looking at, things to be aware of, whether those are policies or who they need to get in touch with. Some of the data quality stuff that we talked about and building that trust and building out those trust check flags with those endorsements. And then finally being able to use and potentially reuse different objects throughout the catalog site, right? If you come from that mindset, that should kind of help be a pretty good guidance in terms of what do you think you need to start building out on the Connect site? Like what should I put in this description section, or what custom fields do I think I need? It can as you start to connect to your sources in the beginning and you start to ingest all those tables and columns, it can feel a bit overwhelming on how am I going to tackle all of this. So keeping FUTURE in mind, as well as a couple other things that I'll mention here in a second, can in terms of prioritization, will be able to kind of help get you started and kind of chip away at things and kind of have that model to be able to build out a Connect or Alation site that over time will continue to grow in value. So let's just kind of take a look at what I've got up in front of our page here, or on the screen here, right? Back to our channels view page. And you can see this is actually a pretty well built out page that's got a lot of information here. So in this particular page, we've kind of shuffled around some of the layout a little bit to our preference. So in this case, we wanted to really highlight who the stewards were. So anybody that wanted to know who they needed to get in touch with around this particular view, they'll know exactly right away. It's front and center, right? But usually what's going to be, and usually the first thing you're going to see is this description section. Now, in this case, it's a pretty short and simple, straight to the point section. As we have talked about before, this is a pretty flexible area that's going to allow you not to just write out your basic description, but allow you to link to other objects or users that are in the Alation site. It's going to allow you to actually embed and build out tables or embed links to videos or images and all of those potentially supportive context that a user might need in terms of understanding what this particular view is all about. On the right-hand side is typically where a lot of your custom fields are going to live, though, like we did with the stewards, you can actually kind of push that over to the middle and change the layout. But sometimes description sections can get pretty long. So calling out some of these particular fields over here on the right are going to allow those to pop out a little bit more and be a little bit easier for your users to find. And a lot of these are also going to be fields that can be filtered on when you're performing an advanced user search. Domains are definitely going to be one of the first types of filters you might apply, but you might also be searching for things that are consisting of a particular tag or might be related to particular articles or whatever those custom fields that you built out here on the right. They're often going to be something you can filter on as you're browsing throughout the Alation site. So this is kind of the basic first place you'll go is start building out descriptions, tags, assigning stewards and owners. Those are going to be critical for your users to start to not just understand, but be able to know who to reach out to and start to collaborate with, and if they have any questions or concerns or suggestions. In terms of prioritizing what to focus on first, like you might have an idea of in your head of like, hey, this is what's in my scope. I need to hit these particular tables right off the bat. But sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming as you're ingesting so many different data source objects. If you perform what's called a query log ingestion, Alation actually has the ability to perhaps start to help prioritize some of those objects for you. So if you're not sure which table or data source to start focusing on first, if you start to ingest those query logs, Alation's going to read through those and start to pick up on a couple of things. First, it's going to pick up just general popularity. So as I switched over here, you can see that within this particular schema, it's actually giving me a popularity ranking on all of the tables that are in this schema. Now, this is a schema that's only consisting of 6 tables. It's not a whole lot going on here. But if I had hundreds of tables or thousands of tables, this popularity bar actually would become a lot more helpful. And this is going to tell me as a potential steward that says, hey, it sounds like more people are coming to this table than all the tables below it. Maybe you want to start focusing on that first and building out everything that you need there, since so many people are hitting that table. So you want to make sure that they know exactly what this table is about. You might need to make sure that all these people that are hitting this table are aware of potential policies that they need to be aware of. And also perhaps, and certainly add a steward or a particular owner of this table so that if anyone has any questions or needs help with anything, they know exactly who to reach out to instead of guessing or just asking around and slowing down the process. So the popularity bar is definitely great. As I come back to my other tab here with my channel views, another thing that Alation will pick up on is the top users that are actually hitting that particular data object. So this is going to also be helpful if you're not sure who should be the person in charge of managing this page, whether it's at the data source level or here. Understanding who are the people that are querying that table the most often, getting that kind of top hit user list could be helpful for you to start having conversations with those users, whether it's perhaps asking them to step up and be the go-to steward for this particular page, or perhaps using them as a reference to understand, hey, what should users be aware of? If I'm in charge of curating the content on this page, maybe I can set up a couple calls with some of these users here to get a sense of, hey, what should I be aware of? Can you tell me, since you're the one that's using this table the most often, you seem to be the expert, can you kind of help fill me in on exactly what other users should be aware of this? So those are a couple of places to kind of help get your feet under yourself as you start out using Alation and ingesting all of those sources. taking advantage of top users and the popularity bar are going to be great. Other areas that are going to be helpful to start to curate and be aware of for your end users as you're in that stewardship role. Salvador had mentioned the identifying sensitive data, right? Again, we talked about sample content a little bit before. We know that it is an optional feature. It's not something that will automatically get brought in. By default, this feature is turned off. It's something you would enable and bring in. But there might be cases where hey, there's enough sample data we want to bring in where it's going to be a lot, it's going to provide a lot of benefits. But if we're going to do that, we also need to be aware of particular columns or data values that we don't want certain people to see. So Alation does give you the ability to mask certain data, right? And data values in columns. If we wanted to make sure we were hiding a particular ID, this is just an ID that probably doesn't mean much here, but maybe if this was like an SSS or a social security number, SSN number, right? Or anything else that might be part of PII, hey, there might be other values on this table that we still want to bring in for the sampling purposes, but we want to hide those particular columns. Well, Alation is going to give you the ability to actually manage that. So if you're a data source admin, you'll have the ability to come into the source settings. And among other things here are going to be specifically your ability to bring in samples and actually kind of curate how you want to go about those samplings and how much you want to bring in. But we also have a tab here called the per object parameters. So if I click in and start drilling down a little bit, you can start to see a couple of options here right away, which is, hey, do we want to make this particular table browsable? Meaning, do we want this to be something that people can stumble upon as they're searching the site? You can actually remove that from search lists. One note there is it won't take it off Alation altogether. If someone knew this particular table and wanted to go to it directly with the URL or search for that exactly, they can still find it. But this basically kind of is like an initial blocker for people coming to it directly. But the other column you can see here is the sampling column. So if I didn't want to include any particular table as part of that sample ingestion, I can just start going down the list here and start unchecking those objects that I want to remove. And when I run the sample scanner the next time, it would not include that, and in fact, it would actually remove those samples. So that can be super helpful in terms of managing tables altogether, or sources altogether. If you wanted to kind of adjust how people are coming through the Alation site and finding particular data values. Okay, moving along is right. As you're perhaps maybe one of the head stewards of the Alation site that have a team of stewards helping you build out the content throughout the Alation site, you might want to get a sense of, all right, well, how much activity is going on? How much progress have we made? Alation's got, and I'll show you how I got to this page. So Alation's got, back to our apps drawer tab. If I open that up, you'll see there is a second drop down under curate here, which has a few options here. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these here today, but I will click into a couple of them. So the first one I'll jump into here is called the stewardship dashboard. And this will give me a couple just helpful items here, whether it's relevant to just myself or perhaps the Alation site as a whole. For now, most of this is going to default to just giving me information about me personally and how my stewardship progress is being, how it's been going. So you can see of the objects that I've been assigned to, I've only been able to do about 10% curation progress. Now, the way this is calculated, and you can see I'm hovering over the little information box here, is just understand that, all right, the more you build out the content for a particular page, right, the more this number is going to go up. But sometimes this number doesn't behave the way people expect, and a lot of that has to just do with the way it's being calculated. So if there's, if you've curated a lot of the fields on a particular table page, but you haven't gone down to the column level page and curated those objects as well, this number incorporates both the table and the column. So basically, the parent and the child objects, it's considering all of that and the total curation throughout that relationship. And so something to be aware of is that if this number is not creeping up as high as you thought it might just have to do with not not going to the depth of filling out the children to the extent, going down to that level enough. Now, I wouldn't be obsessed with getting to this to 100%, right? There are certain times you don't really need to go down to the column level. Other times there are. So some of this is going to be up to your preference. But the point here is that you can monitor your personal progress, or I can actually adjust these filters here and get a sense of what's going on at the site as a whole. Looking further down the page, we've got just the stewardship catalog activity from what I've been doing recently. The last part of this page here is just looking at data stewards throughout the Alation site as a whole, and just for now looking at tables, but I can switch this up by object type, and just getting a sense of, hey, how many stewards are we assigning? And again, this is a critical curation step to make, is assigning stewards to objects, so your consumers or your browsers of the Alation site know who to reach out to, or we at least know who's responsible for certain pages. From here, I can jump into a little bit more detailed view and kind of get a sense of the curation progress. Whether, if I back out of myself here for a sec, again, you kind of have those same filters and just get a little bit more in-depth look at what's going on. And back to our popularity bar, right? We wanted to know what to focus on first, and we can see if our curation progress is matching our popularity, because these are probably the items we were going to want to prioritize first. So we want to put more focus into curating these assets first. And so we want to make sure that these percentages, or these curation progress percentages, are growing probably first before some of these other objects. I'm sure there's going to be some objects that are a little bit more important down here that might be, depending on what your objectives and goals are. But in general, usually we see that whatever is the most popular is typically where people want to focus on first. So this is actually the second tab here, in terms of this curate dropdown. I'm going to skip these three really here. The only other one I'll call out for now is we have the ability to kind of just come here and start assigning data objects or stewards to data objects a little bit more efficiently. And we can just kind of come down here and just start searching for users. So if I were familiar with any of these particular data objects, I can start assigning those stewards here right away, and kind of just, again, help that curation progress start to grow. You can also, from an advanced user search, assign steward as well. So if I came into an advanced search, started checking off a number of objects here, this is one of those bulk actions. Bulk actions is actually come in here and start updating steward as well. So that could be very helpful. Just another way I go about browsing the site. The last thing I will touch on here is just with regards to glossaries. And this is something that you can probably even build out your own section to, in terms of the importance of having a glossary built out for your organization. Talking about standardization, avoiding misinterpretation, helping people, if they're new to a company, they're not sure about the abbreviations or acronyms used within your organization, right? There's a lot of self-service needs for this, but in terms of a steward, definitely another place that you want to make sure you're building out. So if you were with us during the policy section of the webinar, you'll see this page is laid out the same way, where we have our terms at the bottom, as well as ability to group those terms by a particular glossary type. So you can see we've broken this out basically by departments, but it's important to start building out this as well, and leveraging these terms by embedding them into descriptions, or typically this will be embedded into descriptions as you're building out those fields for your data objects. But something not to be overlooked, because if people aren't understanding the terms in the right way, they might be applying calculations incorrectly. Thus, your dashboards and your reports might not be interpreted the same way universally throughout your organization. And if that's the case, you're going to have a lot of discrepancies, and in the end, going to end up having to do a lot of work and lose a lot of time. So yeah, I just wanted to cover this briefly around glossaries, that this is here. This is definitely a feature of the site, and something as a steward you want to make sure that you're contributing to as well. All right, that's all I had for you guys here today in terms of the curation. Again, this is something we can go down a much further rabbit hole, but I really just wanted to cover some of the basics at a high level here, and just let you know what's available at your hands within the Alation site. All right, Salvador, I will throw it back over to you.
Hey, thank you, Sean. Our next step is workflows. Or our next phase, I should say, is workflows of the webinar, and the importance of workflows. So we'll get back on that in about a minute or two. So the next area we're going to discuss is a very important one. That is workflows and governance. Why is it important? Well, let's start by just a little understanding of workflows. So workflows is a repeatable process that is automated. So in the sense that we're discussing here, why is that important? Because you really then can develop processes that are repeatable and also that can be measured, and that will allow you, in some sense, to really apply governance in areas that normally that would be a manual process that can then turn into an automated process or really improve your program going forward. So why are workflows important? So they give you the ability to have an open community to make contributions with having a certain amount of control, and those workflows can be peer reviewed. So you can have workflows that everyone can see, improve on, and apply. They're very easy to create, maintain, and they can introduce a lot of complexity, but complexity can be simplified within the workflow. And then workflow functionality that's available. You're within Alation, you're able to make change requests, add objects, terms, etc. So this can improve both the efficiency, but also the quality of what work you're doing within Alation. So some best practices around workflows. When do we need to have a workflow? So that's, I think, a common question that anybody can ask. Really, it's around when you're working on policies, right? Any policy that's want to be updated, et cetera, can have workflows. Business critical terms or critical data elements, for example, can have workflows. So when changes need to be requested or done, there's could be workflows supporting that. This also would include anything around sensitive or business critical data objects as well. When do you not want to have a workflow? So that may be just as important as when you want one, because sometimes when you get a new tool, you tend to want to use it, and you want to use it in all the areas, but you don't need to use it everywhere. And so areas around workflows that you do not want to use for are really around test data objects. Definitely not there because obviously it's test. You don't need a workflow for a test. That's definitely would run contradictory to that. You definitely don't want a workflow around objects that not requiring data stewardship, um, and also objects that are currently in development. Why? Because those are going to change. So there's no need to have any workflows in those areas. So a little bit around workflows with Alation, just to give you a taste right before we jump into the demo. So here's an example of where there's no workflow that's available, a workflow that is available that's been published. So here, if you have a workflow that has been published, you'll see a suggest change on the side, and a workflow where there's no workflow, for example, in this area around this table, it will tell you edit. So you'll be able to definitely create that workflow in that example when you see that edit sign. So that's a little bit around workflows. Don't forget, workflows are around efficiency. They should be used in areas that are repeatable and that allow you to improve the process, but they can't be used in all areas. So those are just some of the key points around workflows to remember. And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Sean, who is going to run us through. Oops. Who's going to run us through if I can get there. So there we go. Oops, we went too far. There you go, Sean.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Salvador. Okay, so just picking up on that last slide that Salvador had shared with you just a few seconds ago, right? We were circling the two different buttons that changed based on if there's workflows applied or not to your data objects. So, right, coming back to our channel views page, right? If you were following along before, as we were jumping in throughout different pages throughout this webinar, you might have caught on to this little button change, right? You can see for this page, we actually have, instead of this edit button here, we've got the suggest change, right? If I jump onto another page, you can see the difference, right? So if I have the ability to come in and directly edit, I'm going to have that edit button available to me. I can come in and make all the changes that I want within this given description section, as well as the rest of the page here. Not the case when it comes to this channels view page. If I wanted to come in and make an edit, let's say did a description field here, all I can do is really hit the suggest change button. Well, it looks like this is one that we need to actually complete the setup. This will still work for now. Basically, I can still come in and make changes to this for this description field. And I can, let's say, tag someone, let's say myself, right? I can even see to say show the difference as I'm reviewing this myself before I submit it. Now, in this case, look, we can't submit this actual for review in this moment, so this is a bad example, but I'll show you how we can fix this as we go to create a workflow in a couple of seconds here. But ideally, what would happen here is I would hit submit for review, and there would be someone that is put in charge that is responsible for reviewing all the changes made to this particular data object. And they would come back in, see the changes that I made, and decide whether or not that should be approved or rejected. So look, the goal of a catalog, right, is very much generally to encourage people to discover what's available to them throughout their environments, right? That's why you're trying to centralize all this, and you're also trying to encourage multiple users to be able to come in and also support the curation of your site. But we know that there's going to be cases where we're not going to be able to, we don't want that to just run wild. We want to actually put some controls in place. As Salvador said, that's the purpose of these workflows. One of those main things we had touched on during our policy segment is the ability to actually manage who can come in and edit those. Now, in the policy page, you saw we were actually able to manage that through the more button, and that was in the policy page. There was actually a line item in here that said access settings. Now that doesn't exist throughout through all objects throughout the site, and so that's where workflows are really going to come into play, even for your policies as well. But so let's show you exactly how to move forward with that. So if you have identified a set of data sources, whether it's a schema or a table, that you wanted to actually put some controls in to manage how updates are being made and put in a peer review process. Coming back to our apps drawer, we're going to go back into our govern section, our govern app. This is again where we had our policies before. Basically, this is actually where some of the stewardship that we had touched about before, you can actually kind of come back to. This is kind of your home base, but you'll see here, this is also where we can come in and build workflows. So at the moment, we have a couple of unpublished ones. We can actually republish those here in a second. But before we do that, what you'll do is, if you're ready to create a new workflow, you'll come up top here and you'll have two options. You'll have the option to add object requests or change requests. Now, when it comes to the add object requests, this is actually only going to apply to the request to add objects for glossary terms. This won't apply for any other object types throughout your Alation site. So this isn't going to apply to tables or reports or any of those types of objects. The add object request is specifically designed for the request of adding a new term to your glossary. For everything else, including glossary terms, but also all your other objects, with the exception of articles, as there's a dedicated process for that, you have the ability to build a workflow to manage change requests. So let's just start there for this moment. So I'm going to basically go through the process of creating a new workflow. And I'm going to kind of duplicate another workflow that I've built out already. Customer file, change request. I'm going to give it a name. Once I've given it a name, now I need to kind of help Alation out here by saying, hey, all right, where do we want to enable this workflow on? Let's pick some sources here. So in this case, I'm looking to just have this be managed by for table objects. Once I've picked my object, and you only can do one at a time, unfortunately. So if you wanted to put the same change requests that I'm building out here for another object type, you would have to build out a separate workflow. But once you've picked your object type, the next thing, step 2, is going to be to select either to have this made on all object types, or to start to select exactly which tables you want to apply this to. So in this case, I'm looking for a particular table called customer file. And in this case, I actually have the ability to either include the columns in there that are a part of this table or exclude it by just simply clicking it by either highlighting or unhighlighting that particular object. In this case, I'll just leave the columns on as is, since I'm also going to be managing those. I want to make sure that's being reviewed before any changes are made. Step 3 is going to be, okay, now we know our object type. We know specifically within that object type what objects you want to be managing. Within those objects, what fields do you actually want to manage? So you have the option to simply just select all, and it's going to be any changes that can be made on that page altogether. You're now going to be adding that suggest change workflow or that suggest change button. Or you can be a little bit more granular here and select, no, I want to be specific with just the title and description, or any of the custom fields that we've built in. We can start to select those and say, nope, I want to be able to manage who can add policies to this page, right? And so once I've done that, the last part here is if I was doing a group of workflows, let's say, a group of tables that are all belonging to a particular schema, I can actually say, no, let's not apply this to a particular set of tables within that schema. But in this case, since we're just focusing on one particular table, we can skip this step and just simply hit next. And so that completes the first phase of building out a workflow. We basically have identified what objects we want to apply a suggest change to, and within those objects, specifically which fields. So the second part comes with, and this is where I said in the example we looked at in the channels view, they did not, whoever created that did not finish this process here by adding those reviewers. So you have some options here in terms of who you want to designate as the people responsible for managing any edit requests. First thing is you can either just designate one person, or you can say, hey, as long as one of the following people approve, then that change will be approved. Or you can say, no, I want to do this by committee. So we need at least a certain minimum number of users to approve. So maybe you want to say, hey, just because it goes through one person, that's not enough. I want to make sure the following 2 people or the following 2 people out of these groups have approved. So once we get 2 yeses, then the change has finally been approved. In this case, I think it's just going to be fine if we just have the one person that we're putting in charge, or having at least one person that's being added to this list approves it. That's good enough for me. So you have the ability to add individual users. So we can add myself. Maybe we'll add Salvador, right? Or if we've actually created groups here, and groups meaning either those default roles that come out of the box with Alation, or if we get into people sets, which is basically going to be anyone that's been added to a particular stewards or experts field on a given object page, Alation will designate those specific people just for those specific pages to be the ones that are allowed to come in and actually update those changes. So people sets can often be confused with groups, or and it feels like there's a lot of overlap there, but basically this allows you to be a little bit more granular. Instead of saying anyone who's a steward can come in and make that approval, no, I want to be specific. I want to say only stewards who have been applied as the steward for a particular object page can actually come in and make those changes. So I just wanted to make that extra clear to everyone. But in this case, I think just adding myself and Salvador is going to be enough. Again, to be clear, if one of the 2 of us come to an object page that has been has a submitted edit request, only one of us has to go in and make that approval. So whichever one gets to it first is going to be good enough. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so you can either basically this bottom section is just speaking to, you can either say everyone that's been added has to approve, or you can just be more specific on just selecting a certain amount. This last button here down at the bottom is just a little toggle that allows the people who have been designated as responsible for managing those reviews can actually just bypass this process altogether, since they're the ones that are going to be reviewing it anyway. You can actually just toggle that on and just say, hey, if Sean's going to a particular page or Salvador's going to a particular page that they're managing, they don't have to go through this review process. They can just make the change on the fly, on the spot. So can be a little bit helpful for those users. But for now, just to show you the demonstration purposes, I'm going to leave this off and then click done. And at this point, you have the ability to kind of chain together steps by adding more reviews. But in this case, I think this is fine to just say this workflow ends. Let's go ahead and actually publish this. Got a successful publish message. And now we can see that this workflow has been published. So now when we head to this, let's see if we can go to that page. Refreshing my customer file page, which a moment ago said edit. But as you can see now, for those fields that we said needed to go through a review process, we can see that we've got that suggest change. Now, if I wanted to come in and actually make an edit, let's say I wanted to make a small change to our description field here. Let's say I wanted to tag another table that has been right. So right now what I've done is I've just referenced another table that exists and trying to basically with the purpose saying, hey, this is related to this other particular table. Let's go ahead and submit them for review. As I'm making this edit, I can see that, hey, these are the people that are going to have to review your edit. And so if I have any questions, I know who to reach out to, or if they reject it, I also know who to reach out to. But I can go ahead and hit submit for review. I get an update saying my submission has my review has been successfully submitted. Close that out. And now if I'm the reviewer, what I'm going to be able to do is I'll refresh. And if I'm already on the page, you'll see there's actually a little pop-out box here that says, hey, there's something that's being ready for review on this page. But if I'm kind of just on my home page, it takes there's a little bit of lag there. But if I go to my inbox, I can come in there and switch over to tasks, and I can see the list of all change requests that have been made by all of the objects that I'm in charge of reviewing. I can click into it. It'll automatically bring up the edit itself. It's already color coding it for me, saying, hey, here's what's been added. And I either have the ability to simply approve this, or I can hit reject, and I even have the ability to share with that user or that contributor why I have rejected their submission. So this can be a great way. In this case, I'm going to approve it. And now this is actually a live update that now users, when they come to this page, they're going to be able to see the changes that have been made. So relatively pretty straightforward process. Again, the goal here is for particular objects or maybe particular fields within objects, we can control what changes are being made by just having a dedicated person come in and approve or reject those edits being made. But can be a great way to just manage your Alation site as your ingestion of sources as well as curation of sources start to proliferate. This can be a great way to just kind of keep things under control. And so there you go. That's how we got, that's how we manage workflows.
Hey, thank you, Sean. Thank you again. So the last topic on the webinar is a little addition that we've added. There's no demo along with this next area, so we're going to pop right into a very important topic that without this, I think you won't be successful in the long run. So I'm going to share my screen, but we're going to jump into change management. It's something that's close and dear to everybody's heart, I know, but it's needed because if not, you definitely won't be able to get or sustain your Alation, both implementation and your data governance programs as you move forward. So real quick, I'm going to discuss a little bit what change management is and why, a little bit about a method called the ADKAR method, and some additional resources before we get to the Q&A overall for this webinar. So what is change management? Change management is the process, tools, and techniques used to manage the people side of change to achieve the required outcome that the business wants to arrive at. So this is a classical definition, but it's a very important definition to understand because without this component, it will be very difficult to really take the tools, technologies, and methodologies that you introduce into your organization and really make them achievable and tangible. So very quickly, let's look at what change management looks like overall, and look at this schema to give us a good understanding of it. So change management, what it is. So you have to have a reason for change to begin with. And the reason for change is because the current state that you're at does not align well currently with where you want to arrive or achieve a purpose to achieve in the future. So there's definitely a future state that you want to arrive at. You're currently at a position that you're sort of, your organization is not where it needs to be, and it needs to arrive at a future state. And so that process, that whole process there will hopefully lead to change and lead to success. So there's a couple aspects to this. One, you have a technical side to your change, and then you have a people side. So the technical side is kind of what we've been talking about today. It's we've been talking about Alation. Uh, we've been talking about a little bit about the methodology that supports Alation and active data governance. So it's the design, the development, the delivery of that technology along with the framework. However, there's the people side, and I think the people side may be even more difficult. Um, because an application, you implement it, it's there, but without the people side to the equation, it's not possible to get that to reach that success. So you have to engage with people. They have to adopt and believe in what you're doing, and then they have to use the technology and they use the new frameworks and processes in order to achieve that success. So both the technical and the people side come together, and they add those aspects that equal success. Without that, you won't be able to achieve your success. And change management really is about how you take the people side of the equation and what changes need to be introduced in order for them to use that new technology, to use those new frameworks to achieve that future state. And that's kind of a little bit called the transition state um, as you move forward in change management. So a little bit about this methodology. So, it's classical methodology. You have different phases. You have your prepare phase, your manage your change, your sustain, how you sustain program. It's very common with all methodologies to follow sort of this process. So the first step is obviously the preparations stage. That's where you define what success looks like. You define the impact. You define what approach you're going to use. The second phase is tracking the performance, planning, how you're going to adopt the actions that you intend to adopt. And then the final phase is how you're going to sustain it. So that's where you're going to review performance. That's where your metrics come in. Um, Sustainment comes in, et cetera. You realize the change, and then you continuously improve that change, and the whole circle starts over again. So as part of that framework, we have 5 building blocks for successful change that I'm going to introduce. That's awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So very quickly, so on each of these, there's obviously they're defined, but they also have some outcomes you want to achieve. So in awareness, um, you want to understand the why around it. So what is the nature of the change? Why is it needed? And what's the risk of not changing? The second one is desire. And that's where, you're going to meet that aspect of when you address every individual, they're going to ask themselves a question: what is it in it for me? So what do they have? What are they going to achieve from this? How does it benefit them? So that's when you engage and participate with individuals. The third, knowledge, requires knowing how. So what do they need to know in order to implement the change? So what new training, what new skills, how they understand the change, those are all aspects of that section, that element, I should say. The fourth is ability. So that change requires action in the right direction. It's the demonstrated ability to really implement the change. So are you able to do it? Can you achieve the desired change? Can you adopt the new ways of working? So those outcomes are critical in this stage. The final one is reinforcement, and it goes back to that third step there, and that is, how do you reinforce the change? How do you sustain the change? How do you recognize and make sure that when the changes do occur, how do you reinforce it in terms of with individuals? giving out, awards, et cetera, is an aspect of reinforcement, but also acknowledging the successes as well in this stage, and making sure that if you discover something that's not working, to restart the process and address, excuse me, those areas that are not fully evolving according to the framework and the changes that you're trying to introduce. So incorporating effective change management, you want to do it with a couple of areas of what I call the withs. So with awareness and desire, with knowledge and ability, and with reinforcement. So we've kind of already gone through that in those 5 steps, but you want everyone to understand why the change is necessary. And as part of that, you really want to understand how this change is going to address the business objectives or the future business objectives. So that has to be really mapped out and really understood. You have to, people within knowledge and ability, this goes back to that part of the technical component of change management. And people then have to truly understand, if you've introduced new technology, how are they going to use that technology to achieve that new business objective? So that's very critical there, and training is going to be a big factor in how that plays. Obviously, the support of those employees as they make that transition is very important. Third is reinforcement. How do you reinforce it? Through highlighting the successes. How do you support employees in that journey in terms of embracing that change, and then rewarding the employees that are able to get to that change, able to achieve the goals of your program. Now, without effective change management, and as we noted, if you introduce a new technology, a new methodology, and you don't introduce change management, you're going to get questions. You're going to get questions from employees around, why are we doing this? It could lead to lower productivity, could lead to people leaving your organization. Especially, you don't want people leaving your organization that first are contribute to the organization in a very positive way, especially if they take a lot of knowledge with them. So a lot of inherent knowledge that they may have leaves with an organization if they do leave. Also, lower utilization of the technology that you do introduce. So that part of that sustainability and adoption of a new technology really runs around having the knowledge and the ability, but also obviously the awareness and desire. If those 2 areas are not met, then the usage of that technology is definitely low, and it leads to low ROI for that technology. And finally, reinforcement. If these new changes that occur in the organization are not reinforced, then the tendency by employees is to revert back to kind of what they did before. Because if you're used to doing something for 5 or 10 years, and you introduce new technology, but there's a lack of reinforcement, a lack of understanding how it's being utilized or not being utilized, then you also will get a failure in terms of your return on investment that you made in this technology or in these new frameworks. So with that said, here's some resources and references that you can use for change management that that'll be part of this this slide deck and part of this webinar that we'll be able to give to you guys as you move forward in your journey. With that said, we can enter the Q&A phase. And thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at info@datameeting.com, or you can contact myself directly or Sean at our emails that we've listed on the slide. And with that said, I want to thank everyone for participating in the webinar, and watch out for new webinars as they come out in the future. Thank you again.